There are moments in life that arrive so quietly you almost miss them. Moments that seem like nothing when they happen, but somehow rearrange everything that comes after. This is about one of those moments. About the night my best friend said he missed being hugged, and I reached across the space between us without thinking, without knowing that simple gesture would unravel every careful wall I had built around my heart. It was late October, the kind of autumn evening that feels borrowed from winter, when the air carries the promise of snow and the trees stand naked against a sky the color of old pewter. I remember the television flickering in the corner of my living room, volume turned down to almost nothing, casting blue shadows across the walls like some restless ghost. The smell of pine hung in the air from a candle I had lit hours earlier and forgotten about, its flame dancing in the draft that seeped through the old windows of my Providence apartment. Marcus sat on the far end of my couch, his long legs stretched out in front of him, one arm draped over the backrest in that casual way that had always made him look like he belonged anywhere he chose to settle. His body was angled slightly away from me, not in rejection, but in that unconscious way people position themselves when they are carrying something heavy inside and do not want it to spill over onto someone else. He had been staying with me for 3 weeks by then, sleeping on the pull-out bed that had transformed my living room into a temporary sanctuary for his unraveling life. The breakup with Sarah had come suddenly, though I suppose all endings feel sudden to those who experience them, even when the signs have been accumulating like autumn leaves for months. 6 years together. 6 years of dinners with her parents and shared Netflix passwords and conversations about mortgages and babies that never quite materialized into anything concrete. Everyone expected them to get married. Hell, I expected them to get married. But instead, she packed her things into boxes marked with careful handwriting, and Marcus called me from his car in some parking lot, his voice hollow and strange, asking if he could crash on my couch until he figured out what came next. I said yes without hesitation. Of course I said yes. That is what best friends do. They open their doors and their lives and pretend that having the person they have quietly loved for over a decade sleeping 20 feet away is not a form of exquisite torture. We fell back into our old rhythms easily enough. The same comfortable silence we had perfected in college when we were roommates sharing a space barely large enough for one person, let alone two. We cooked simple meals together, watched movies neither of us really cared about, and talked the way we always had about work and books and the small disappointments that make up most of adult life. But underneath it all, something had shifted. Something in the quality of his attention when I spoke, something in the way our shoulders would touch when we sat together, and neither of us would move away. That night we had been talking about nothing important. The weather, maybe, or some article one of us had read about the decline of independent bookstores. The kind of conversation that fills space without demanding anything from either participant. But then Marcus went quiet for a long moment, staring at the muted television as if it held answers to questions he had not yet learned how to ask. "I miss being hugged," he said finally, the words emerging soft and almost embarrassed, as if he were confessing to some childish need he ought to have outgrown by now. He let out a small laugh, shaking his head at himself. It sounds stupid when I say it out loud. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something I had never seen before. Not sadness, exactly, though that was there too. It was more like bewilderment, as if he had woken up one day to find himself in a life he did not recognize, speaking a language he had never learned. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could hear the radiator clicking in the kitchen, the distant hum of traffic on the street below, the almost inaudible whisper of the candle flame. And then, without making any conscious decision to do so, I was moving, scooting across the couch toward him, reaching out with both arms and pulling him against me. The hug was brief, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15. His arms came up around my back, and I felt the weight of him, the solid reality of him, the way his breathing shifted and deepened, as if he were allowing himself to remember what it felt like to be held. His hair tickled my cheek, and I caught the scent of his shampoo, something clean and familiar that I had been unconsciously cataloging for years without admitting it to myself. When we separated, It was natural, unforced. He smiled at me, that crooked half-smile I knew better than my own reflection, and said thanks as if I had done nothing more remarkable than hand him a glass of water. We went back to watching the television, went back to our careful conversation about inconsequential things. An hour later, he folded out the bed and arranged his pillows the way he always did, and I retreated to my own room and closed the door between us. But I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying those 15 seconds over and over like a film reel stuck on a single scene. The way his body had felt against mine. The small sound he had made when I first pulled him close, barely audible, but unmistakably vulnerable. The moment of hesitation before his arms came up to return the embrace, as if he were asking himself permission for something he wanted but did not understand. I had hugged Marcus before, of course, countless times over the years. Quick embraces when we said goodbye after visits, celebratory hugs when one of us got good news, the occasional drunken hug during particularly sentimental moments in college. But this had been different. This had been an answer to a question he had not quite asked, and the weight of that responsibility settled on my chest like a stone I could not dislodge. I found myself trying to decode the moment, to extract meaning from every detail as if I were translating some ancient text. Had there been something deliberate about the way he said it? Had he been asking for something more than comfort? Or was I simply projecting my own desperate longing onto an innocent moment between friends, the way I had been doing for so many years that it had become as natural as breathing? The rational part of my mind, the part that had kept me safe and sane through a decade of unrequited love, insisted that I was reading too much into it. Marcus was grieving. He was lonely and displaced and reaching out for human connection in the most basic way possible. The hug meant nothing beyond that simple need for comfort, and to imagine otherwise was to risk everything I valued most about our friendship. But there was another part of me, a part one usually kept buried so deep I could pretend it did not exist, that whispered different possibilities, that reminded me of all the small moments over the years that had felt charged with something unspoken. The way his eyes would linger on me, sometimes when he thought I was not looking. The way conversations would shift into deeper territory late at night when we were both tired and our defenses were down. The way he had always seemed to save his most vulnerable moments for me, as if I were the only person in the world he trusted to witness him without armor. I turned onto my side and pulled the blanket up to my chin, trying to quiet the storm of speculation in my head. Through the thin walls of my apartment, I could hear him moving around in the living room, the soft sounds of someone trying to get comfortable in an unfamiliar bed. I wondered if he was having trouble sleeping too. I wondered if he was thinking about the hug, analyzing it the way I was, or if it had already faded into the background noise of an otherwise ordinary evening. The candle in the living room had probably burned down by now, leaving us both in darkness. But I knew that when morning came, we would sit across from each other at my small kitchen table, sharing coffee and sections of the newspaper, and neither of us would mention what had happened. We would go on being what we had always been to each other, best friends navigating the careful boundaries of intimacy without ever acknowledging that those boundaries existed. And maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be enough. But as I finally drifted towards sleep in the small hours of the morning, I carried with me the memory of that moment when he had relaxed into my arms as if he had been waiting his whole life for someone to hold him exactly that way. It was a dangerous thing to remember, a dangerous thing to want. But it was mine now, folded into the secret catalog of moments I would never forget and could never speak aloud. The last thing I remember before sleep finally claimed me was the sound of his breathing through the wall, steady and deep, and the foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, he was dreaming of me too. I am 34 years old, and I have become an expert at living with loneliness. Not the dramatic kind that drives people to desperate acts or grand gestures, but the quiet, manageable variety that settles into your bones like winter and makes itself at home. I tell people I am content when they ask, and most of the time, I even believe it myself. I have built a life that fits me like a well-worn sweater, comfortable in its predictability, safe in its solitude. My apartment in Providence reflects this careful cultivation of independence. It is small but deliberately arranged, every object chosen for its ability to please only me. The bookshelf that dominates one wall is organized not alphabetically or by genre, but by emotional weight. The books that saved me during my darkest periods live at eye level where I can see their spines like old friends. The ones that broke me open and left me raw are relegated to higher shelves, respected, but kept at a safe distance. Poetry collections cluster together near the bottom, within easy reach for nights when I need to remember that other people have felt the particular ache of wanting something they cannot name. Nixie, my gray tabby cat, judges all of this with the serene indifference that only cats can manage. She appeared in my life 3 years ago, a stray who decided my fire escape was an acceptable address, and I found myself buying cat food before I had consciously decided to become a cat owner. She has never been particularly affectionate, preferring to observe my routines from whatever perch offers the best vantage point, but her presence fills the apartment with something that approximates companionship without demanding anything uncomfortable in return. I work as a graphic designer for a small firm downtown, the kind of job that pays enough to sustain my modest needs while leaving enough creative energy for personal projects I never finish. My colleagues are pleasant enough, and we maintain the sort of professional friendships that involve lunch conversations and birthday cards, but never extend beyond the office walls. This suits me fine. I have never been good at the casual intimacy that seems to come naturally to other people, the ability to let strangers become friends without overthinking every interaction. Dating happens sometimes, usually through apps that reduce human connection to a series of strategic decisions based on carefully curated photographs. I meet men who want something casual, something uncomplicated, something that will not interfere with their actual lives. I tell myself I want the same thing, that I am looking for connection without commitment, intimacy without vulnerability. But I am a terrible liar, even to myself, and these encounters usually end with me walking home alone through the quiet streets of Providence, wondering why I continue to seek out experiences that leave me feeling more isolated than before. Marcus and I met during our sophomore year at Brown, randomly assigned roommates in a dormitory that smelled perpetually of industrial disinfectant and teenage ambition. He was studying economics with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted that the world would arrange itself around his plans. I was majoring in art with the anxious intensity of someone trying to justify their existence through creative output. We should have had nothing in common, but somehow we found ourselves staying up until 3 a.m. talking about books we had read, movies that had changed us, the small philosophies we were constructing to make sense of our expanding understanding of the world. For 3 years, we shared spaces barely large enough for one person. I learned the sound of his breathing and sleep, the way he hummed tunelessly when he was concentrating, the particular silence that meant he was working through some problem he had not yet decided to share. He learned that I wrote poetry I would never show anyone, that I had nightmares about my father's drinking, that I could make him laugh even when he was drowning in exam stress or relationship drama. There were moments during those college years when I suspected something deeper about my feelings for him, but I became skilled at burying those suspicions beneath layers of rational explanation. Of course I felt close to him. Of course I looked forward to our conversations more than anything else in my day. Of course I noticed things about him that other people missed. We were best friends living in intimate proximity. The intensity of my attachment was simply the natural result of circumstance, nothing more complicated or dangerous than that. After graduation, life began its slow work of separation. Marcus moved in with Sarah, a psychology major with kind eyes and practical dreams who seemed to understand him in ways I never could. They found an apartment in Boston, and I took a job in New York, then Philadelphia, then finally Providence, always moving towards something I could not quite articulate. We maintained contact through phone calls and visits, through text messages that preserved the easy intimacy of our friendship while acknowledging the new geography of our separate lives. But when Marcus called after the breakup, something shifted back into alignment. His voice on the phone sounded like it had during those late college nights when the world felt both infinite and fragile, and I found myself offering my couch without hesitation, as if the intervening years had been nothing more than an intermission. Having him here now, folding his clothes into neat piles on the chair I never use, leaving coffee cups in the sink and books splayed open on the coffee table, has awakened something I thought I had successfully contained. The apartment feels different with him in it, more alive somehow, as if his presence has reminded the space of possibilities it had forgotten. Our old rhythms return easily enough, but they are layered now with new awareness, new tensions that neither of us acknowledges directly. We share the blanket during winter storms, our shoulders touching as we watch movies we have both seen before. We cook simple meals together, moving around each other in the narrow kitchen with an ease that feels both natural and charged. At night, I listen to him settling into sleep 20 feet away and remember the weight of him in my arms, the way he had relaxed against me, as if coming home to something he had not realized he was missing. I am 34 years old, and I am no longer an expert at living with loneliness. For the first time in years, I am remembering what it feels like to want something more than solitude, something more dangerous than contentment. And that terrifies me more than any nightmare ever has. The idea comes to him on a Thursday morning in late November, as we sit across from each other at my kitchen table, sharing sections of the newspaper and pretending that the previous night's quiet moment, when our hands brushed reaching for the salt, did not leave us both staring at our plates for longer than necessary. Marcus looks up from an article about winter hiking trails and says, with the kind of casual spontaneity that has always defined him, that we should go to the cabin. The cabin. I have not thought about that place in years, but the mention of it brings back everything at once. The summer after our junior year, when a group of 8 college friends pooled resources to rent a ramshackle structure in the White Mountains of New Hampshire for a week. Days spent swimming in a lake that never warmed above shocking. Nights around a fire pit arguing about books and politics, and the futures we were all so certain awaited us. Marcus and I shared a room with bunk beds like children at summer camp, and I remember lying awake listening to him breathe in the darkness above me, wondering what it would feel like to reach up and touch his hand. Most of those friends have scattered now, claimed by marriages and careers and the inevitable drift that pulls people apart as they discover who they are becoming. But the cabin remains, Marcus tells me, available for rent through the same local family who owned it then. He found the listing online, recognized it immediately from the photographs. Just the two of us this time, he says, a weekend away from everything, a chance to clear his head and figure out what comes next. I say yes before I allow myself to consider all the ways this could complicate everything I've been trying so carefully to manage. Yes, because refusing would require explanations I am not prepared to give. Yes, because the alternative is watching him pack his things and move on to whatever comes after this strange interlude in my living room. Yes, because some part of me that I usually keep buried is curious about what might happen when we remove all the familiar anchors of our daily routine and place ourselves somewhere that exists outside the careful boundaries we have constructed. The drive to New Hampshire takes 3 hours, and we fill it with the kind of easy conversation that has always been our specialty. Music from college years plays through the speakers, and we sing along badly to songs that once felt like anthems but now sound quaint and earnest in ways that make us both smile. Marcus drives with one hand on the wheel and the other gesturing as he talks, and I find myself studying his profile when he is focused on the road, cataloging details I have memorized without meaning to. The way his jaw tightens when he is concentrating. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident he has never fully explained. The cabin is exactly as I remember it, and completely different. Smaller. Somehow, the way places from our youth always are when we return to them with adult eyes. The wood paneling has faded to a softer gray, and the furniture carries the particular mustiness of seasonal rentals, but the bones of the place remain unchanged. The stone fireplace still dominates the main room. The narrow staircase still creaks on the 3rd step. The windows still frame the same view of mountains that seem to shift color with the light. We spend the first hour unpacking and reacquainting ourselves with the space, moving around each other with an awkwardness that surprises me. At home, we have learned to navigate the close quarters of my apartment with practiced ease. But here, everything feels uncertain, charged with possibility neither of us wants to acknowledge. When we both reach for the same matchbook to light the ancient gas stove, our hands touch for just a moment before I pull away as if burned. Marcus notices. Of course he notices. But instead of commenting, he simply takes the matches and lights the burner himself, then looks at me with an expression I cannot quite read. "Are you okay?" he asks, and I nod too quickly, too emphatically, in a way that convinces neither of us. The first night passes quietly. We cook a simple dinner from supplies we brought from Providence, drink wine from mismatched glasses we find in the cupboard, and sit by the fire talking about work and books and everything except the strange tension that seems to fill the spaces between our words. When it comes time for bed, we discover that the upstairs room has only one bed, a double that seemed enormous when we were 21 and skinny and unconscious of the implications of shared sleeping space. We could ask if there is another room, or if one of us should take the couch downstairs. But we do not. Instead, we brush our teeth side by side at the small bathroom sink like an old married couple. I try not to think about the domesticity of it, the way it feels both natural and impossible. That night, we sleep on opposite edges of the mattress, carefully maintaining the space between us like a border neither of us dares to cross. But I'm aware of him in ways that make sleep nearly impossible. The sound of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his side of the bed, the way he shifts in his sleep, turning toward me and then away again as if even unconsciously he cannot decide what distance feels safe. In the morning, we hike the old trail that leads to a rocky outcropping overlooking the valley below. The trees are bare now, their branches reaching toward a sky the color of pewter, and our breath makes small clouds in the cold air. We walk mostly in silence, both of us lost in thoughts we do not share, until we reach the summit and stand looking out over the landscape that stretches endlessly in every direction. "I always thought if I lost her I would fall apart," Marcus says suddenly, his words barely above a whisper. But I didn't. I do not know what to say to this confession, so I say nothing. Just stand beside him, watching the mountains change color in the shifting light, feeling the weight of his revelation settle between us like something precious and fragile that neither of us knows how to hold. When we return from the cabin, something fundamental has shifted in the architecture of our daily life together. It is nothing I can point to directly, nothing as obvious as a conversation or a moment of declaration. Instead, it lives in the spaces between things, in the quality of attention Marcus pays to the smallest details of our shared existence. He starts lingering in rooms after I enter them, as if my presence has become magnetic in ways he does not fully understand. When I am reading on the couch in the evenings, he chooses the chair closest to me rather than his usual spot at the far end. When I am cooking dinner, he appears in the kitchen doorway and leans against the frame, watching me move through the familiar choreography of preparing a meal as if he is memorizing something precious. The notes begin appearing on my desk at work the following week. Small things, written on torn pieces of notebook paper in Marcus's careful handwriting. Reminders that he has picked up milk, or that there is leftover pasta in the refrigerator, or that he will be late getting home because he has started volunteering somewhere. At first, I assume they're simple practicalities, the kind of communication that emerges naturally when two people share a living space. But gradually I begin to notice something more intentional in them, something that feels less like information and more like connection. He starts cooking dinner most nights, taking over the kitchen with a quiet competence that surprises me. Marcus was never particularly domestic during our college years, existing primarily on takeout and whatever could be microwaved in under 5 minutes. But now he stands at my stove, stirring pasta sauce, and asking about my day with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for important conversations. He remembers that I prefer my vegetables slightly undercooked, that I always forget to drink enough water, that I get quiet when I'm processing something difficult. The music changes too. Instead of the background noise we used to ignore, Marcus begins choosing albums deliberately, putting on records he knows I love without asking what I want to hear. Nina Simone plays while we eat breakfast on Saturday mornings. Miles Davis fills the apartment during the long Sunday afternoons when neither of us has anywhere to be. Late at night, when we're both reading in the same room, he puts on the kind of quiet folk music that seems designed for contemplation, and I find myself looking up from my book to catch him watching me with an expression I cannot decode. I feel myself changing in response to this new attention, becoming more cautious and more hopeful in equal measure. I start writing again, something I have not done seriously since college. Poetry that I keep hidden in a notebook I carry everywhere, but never open when anyone else is around. Fragments of observation and longing that try to capture the particular quality of light in our apartment during the golden hour when Marcus is cooking dinner and humming unconsciously to himself. We go grocery shopping together on Thursday evenings, a routine that develops without discussion or planning. We move through the familiar aisles with an ease that feels both natural and charged, debating the merits of different pasta shapes, and whether we need more coffee with the kind of domestic intensity that makes us both smile. Other shoppers probably assume we are a couple, and neither of us corrects this assumption or acknowledges it directly. But I'm aware of it, the way we must look to strangers who see us deliberating over produce and sharing a cart and occasionally bumping shoulders in the narrow aisles. Marcus starts talking about the youth center where he volunteers, describing the teenagers he works with in ways that reveal how much purpose he has found in being useful to people who need guidance. He tells me about a 16-year-old named David who reminds him of himself at that age, uncertain and angry and desperate for someone to see him clearly. He talks about teaching kids to play chess, about helping them with college applications, about the particular satisfaction of watching someone discover they are capable of more than they believe possible. This work seems to be healing something in him, filling spaces that his relationship with Sarah never touched. He comes home from the center with a different energy, more solid somehow, more present in his own skin. And he brings this new groundedness into our shared life, creating stability where before there was only the careful choreography of two people trying not to disturb each other's solitude. One evening in December, we settle in to watch a film I've been wanting to see for months, a quiet foreign movie about two men who meet on a train and spend a single day walking through Prague together. I chose it for reasons I do not examine too closely, drawn to something about the premise that feels relevant to questions I am not ready to ask directly. The film is subtle, almost plotless, following these two strangers as they discover an unexpected connection that neither of them fully understands. There's a scene near the end where they hold hands at a train station, a gesture so simple and natural it takes my breath away. I do not react visibly, keeping my eyes on the screen and my expression neutral, but I am aware of Marcus beside me, aware that he has gone very still. When I glance at him, I discover he is not watching the film at all. He is watching me, studying my face with an intensity that makes my heart race. Our eyes meet for just a moment before I look away, but something passes between us in that brief contact, some acknowledgement of the questions we have been carefully avoiding. Later that night, long after the film has ended and we have said good night and retreated to our separate sleeping spaces, I hear footsteps in the hallway. Marcus appears in my doorway, a dark silhouette against the dim light from the living room. Sometimes I think I have been pretending my whole life. He says softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hang in the air between us like something fragile that might shatter if either of us moves too quickly. I sit up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I am certain he can hear it, pretending what I ask, though I'm not sure I am ready for the answer. But Marcus does not respond. Instead, he walks into my room and sits on the floor beside my bed, leaning his back against the wall and drawing his knees up to his chest. He stays there until dawn begins to filter through the windows, and we do not speak again. But his presence fills the room with possibilities neither of us is ready to name, and I lie awake listening to him breathe and wondering if this is what courage feels like, or if this is simply another kind of pretending altogether. The day everything changes arrives disguised as an ordinary late March evening, the kind that promises spring but delivers only the memory of winter in the form of cold rain that turns the streets of Providence into rivers of reflected streetlight. I leave work early, tired from a client presentation that went longer than expected, and walk home through weather that soaks through my jacket and leaves me shivering by the time I reach my building. I hear the music before I reach my apartment door. Something I do not recognize at first. Something with strings and a melody that seems to rise and fall like breathing. I pause in the hallway, key halfway to the lock, listening to the sound drift through the thin walls. It is not the careful background music Marcus usually chooses, not the thoughtful albums he puts on while we cook dinner or read in comfortable silence. This is something different, something that fills space with intention, something that sounds like dancing. When I open the door, I see him before he sees me. Marcus in my kitchen, moving to music that seems to be coming from somewhere deep inside him, rather than from the speakers on the counter. He has a glass of red wine in one hand, and his movements are loose, unguarded, the kind of unconscious grace that only emerges when someone believes they are completely alone. His eyes are closed, and there is something on his face I have never seen before, something that looks like joy mixed with sadness, mixed with a kind of desperate freedom. I stand in the doorway longer than I should, watching him inhabit my space as if it belongs to him, as if he has finally stopped being a guest in his own life. Rain drips from my jacket onto the floor, but I do not move. There is something sacred about the moment, something that feels too private to interrupt, even though it is happening in my own home. When he finally notices me, Marcus stops dancing but does not look embarrassed. Instead, he grins, that crooked smile I know better than my own reflection, and raises his wine glass in a mock toast. "Welcome home," he says, and there's something different in his voice, something looser and more present than usual. We eat leftover Chinese food from containers we found in the refrigerator, sitting across from each other at my small kitchen table, while the rain continues its percussion against the windows. The conversation flows easily, the way it always is between us, but underneath it I sense something building, some pressure that has been accumulating for weeks and is finally approaching a breaking point. Marcus tells me about his day at the youth center, about a breakthrough he had with David, the angry 16-year-old who has been testing every boundary Marcus has tried to establish. Today, David stayed after his shift ended to help clean up the recreation room, and they talked about college applications, about the future David is afraid to imagine for himself. As Marcus describes this conversation, I watch his face transform, see the way this work has given him something to believe in beyond his own confusion. But there is something else in his expression tonight, something restless and searching that makes me think of the way he was dancing when I arrived home. As if he has been trying all day to find a way to say something he does not have words for yet. The moment comes after we have cleared the dishes, after we have moved to the living room, where the familiar ritual of choosing something to watch usually helps us navigate the transition from day to evening. But tonight, Marcus does not reach for the remote. Instead, he turns to face me directly, and I see something in his eyes that makes my breath catch. "Do you remember when you hugged me that night?" he says, and his voice is softer than usual, more careful. I have not stopped thinking about it. The words hang in the air between us like something fragile and dangerous. I try to smile, to find some way to deflect the intensity of what he is offering, but the expression crumbles before it fully forms. My heart is beating so hard I'm certain he can see it through my shirt. I did not know if it meant something, I admit, and the honesty of it surprises me. For months, I have been so careful to maintain the boundaries of our friendship, to pretend that moment was nothing more than comfort offered between friends. But now, faced with his direct question, I find I cannot lie anymore. Marcus stands up from the couch and walks toward me, closer than he has ever come when we were both fully awake and aware of what we were doing. I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, can smell the wine on his breath mixed with something that is uniquely him. "It did," he says simply, and those two words contain everything I have been afraid to hope for. There is no kiss. Not yet. That would be too much, too fast, too far beyond the careful territory we have been mapping together for so long. Instead, we simply stand facing each other in the center of my living room, the space between us charged with possibility and terror in equal measure. I step forward, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his skin, and rest my forehead against his. The touch is lighter than breath, barely contact at all, but feels like the most intimate thing I have ever experienced. His eyes close, and I watch the way his breathing changes, becomes deeper and more deliberate. We stay like this for a long time, maybe minutes, maybe hours. Neither of us speaks, but something real and fragile begins to form in the silence between us, something that feels too precious to examine too closely. Outside, the rain continues to fall, and inside, two people who have been pretending to be just friends finally stop pretending, even if they do not yet know what they are pretending to be instead. That night, we do not sleep. We sit on my couch, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, and Marcus tells me things he has never told anyone. About the doubts that have been growing for years. About the ways he has felt like an actor playing a role he never auditioned for. About the relief and terror of finally admitting that the life he has been building might not be the life he actually wants. I listen, and I try not to hope too much, and I wonder if this is what it feels like when something true finally finds the courage to speak its name. The call comes on a Tuesday afternoon while I am at work, staring at a computer screen filled with logo designs that all look the same after hours of revision. Marcus's phone buzzes against the kitchen counter of my apartment, a sound I can picture even from 15 miles away because I have memorized the rhythm of our shared domestic life down to the smallest details. He texts me later to say it was Sarah, that she wants to meet, that there are things they need to discuss before she moves to Portland for the graduate program she deferred when they were together. I understand, I text back, though understanding and accepting are different territories entirely. He leaves on Thursday morning, driving to Boston in the car that still carries traces of the life he built with her. Coffee cups in the console, a parking pass for her office building tucked behind the visor, small artifacts of 6 years that he has not yet figured out how to discard. He says he will be back by Friday evening, maybe Saturday morning at the latest. A quick conversation, he tells me, just closure, just the kind of adult communication that allows two people to move forward without carrying resentment or unfinished business. But Friday evening comes and goes without word. Then Saturday morning stretches into afternoon, and I find myself checking my phone with increasing frequency, looking for messages that do not arrive. I try to read, but the words slide off the page without meaning. I try to work on personal projects, but my hands shake too much to hold a pencil steady. Nixie watches me pace through the apartment with the patient judgment of someone who has seen this particular form of human anxiety before. When Marcus finally returns on Sunday afternoon, something fundamental has shifted in the way he carries himself. He moves through my apartment like a stranger, trying to remember how to behave in an unfamiliar space. His responses to my questions are polite but distant, as if we are acquaintances making conversation at a party rather than two people who spend an entire night sitting forehead to forehead discovering what it feels like to stop pretending. He says the conversation with Sarah was more complicated than he expected, that seeing her again reminded him of all the reasons he loved her, all the ways their relationship made sense in the context of the life he thought he wanted. He says he is confused that maybe what happened between us was just grief manifesting in unexpected ways or loneliness driving him toward connection that felt intimate because of circumstance rather than genuine feeling. I listen to these explanations with the careful neutrality I have perfected over years of protecting myself from hope that might prove dangerous. I nod at appropriate intervals and make sounds of understanding, but inside I feel something crucial withering, some fragile thing that grew in the space between us now curling in on itself like a flower touched by frost. That night, he says maybe he has been using me as an escape from dealing with the real work of figuring out what went wrong with Sarah, what patterns in himself he needs to understand before he can move forward. He says he has always been straight, that this is just a phase brought on by the disorientation of a major life change, that he does not want to hurt me by leading me towards something that cannot be real. I do not argue with any of this. How can I? I have no evidence to offer except the memory of the way he relaxed into my arms that first night, The way he looked at me while we watched that foreign film. The way his breathing changed when our foreheads touched. In memory, I have learned, is not admissible as proof of anything except the unreliability of hope. So I pack a bag. Not dramatically, not with any grand gestures or declarations, just the quiet efficiency of someone who needs distance to think clearly. I tell Marcus I'm going to stay at a hotel for a few days, that I need space to process everything that has happened, that this is not about anger, but about self-preservation. He does not try to stop me, which feels like confirmation of everything he has just said. I check into a modest place downtown, the kind of generic accommodation designed for business travelers who need nothing more than a clean bed and reliable Wi-Fi. I sit on the scratchy comforter and try to write the letter I have been composing in my head for weeks, the one that would explain everything I feel without demanding anything in return. But every version sounds either desperate or accusatory, and I delete draft after draft until I give up entirely. Instead, I find myself crying in a public bathroom at a coffee shop near the hotel, the kind of helpless tears that come when hope finally admits defeat. I hate myself for believing that the careful attention he paid to our domestic routines meant something more than friendship. I hate myself for reading intention into gestures that were probably nothing more than the natural intimacy that develops when two lonely people share space and time, and the particular vulnerability that comes with major life transitions. A week passes in this strange suspension. I go to work, eat meals that taste like cardboard, and sleep poorly in a bed that smells like industrial detergent and other people's disappointments. Marcus texts occasionally, asking how I am, suggesting that we should talk when I am ready. But I am not ready, and I begin to suspect I may never be ready to return to the careful choreography of pretending that what happened between us was nothing more than a misunderstanding. Then, on the following Sunday, exactly 7 days after I left, there is a knock on my hotel room door. I open it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, and the sight of him makes something in my chest loosen and tighten simultaneously. I was lying, he says without preamble. I am scared, but I was not confused. He looks exhausted, as if he has not slept since I left, and there is something different in his eyes. Something that looks like the kind of clarity that only comes from walking through fear rather than around it. We stand in the doorway for a long moment, and I realize that this is the choice, the moment when everything either crumbles completely or begins to rebuild on more honest foundations. You do not have to know what it is. I tell him finally, my voice steadier than I expected. Just do not run from it. And for the first time in 7 days, I allow myself to hope again, even though hope is the most dangerous thing I know. 6 months later, and nothing is official. There have been no conversations about labels or definitions, no moment when we sat down and decided what we are to each other beyond what we have always been. The word boyfriend has never passed between us, nor has partner, nor any of the other terms people use to describe the architecture of committed love. What we have exists in the spaces between language, in the accumulation of small choices made daily without fanfare or declaration. The couch is the same one where Marcus first said he missed being hugged, where I reached across the careful distance we had maintained and pulled him into my arms without knowing I was crossing a line I could never uncross. It sits in the same position in my living room, though now it bears the impression of two bodies rather than one, the cushions shaped by the weight of shared evenings and Sunday mornings that stretch into afternoon. On the kitchen counter, 2 coffee mugs rest side by side, waiting for tomorrow's ritual of making breakfast together. One is mine, a simple white ceramic piece I bought years ago when I still believed that living alone was a choice rather than a circumstance. The other is Marcus's, a blue mug he brought from his old apartment when he finally decided to stop calling this arrangement temporary. The sight of them together feels like the most honest statement we have ever made about our intentions. There's a drawer in my bedroom dresser that now contains 2 sets of clothes, his shirts folded next to mine with the careful precision of someone who has learned to make space for another person without sacrificing the parts of himself that require solitude. An extra toothbrush stands in the holder beside the bathroom sink, and sometimes I catch myself smiling at such ordinary evidence of shared domesticity. Marcus is cooking dinner, as he often does now, moving through my kitchen with the confidence of someone who has memorized where I keep the good knives and which burner heats most evenly. He hums while he works, not any particular song, but just the sound of contentment made audible. Steam rises from the pan where he is sautéing vegetables, and the smell of garlic and herbs fills the apartment with something that feels unmistakably like home. I am reading in the chair by the window, a book of poetry I have been working through slowly, letting each piece settle before moving to the next. Nixie has claimed the armrest beside me, purring with the steady rhythm of a small engine, and occasionally I reach out to stroke her gray fur without lifting my eyes from the page. This is what happiness looks like, I think. Not the dramatic kind that announces itself with fireworks, but the quiet variety that builds slowly through repetition and choice. Marcus glances over at me as he stirs the vegetables, and something passes between us that needs no words. A look that contains 6 months of learning how to be together without losing ourselves, 6 months of discovering that love does not always require the kind of certainty that can be explained to other people. Sometimes it is enough to simply choose each other again and again, day after ordinary day. The volunteer work at the youth center has become a permanent part of his life, something that gives him purpose beyond our small domestic universe. He comes home most evenings with stories about the teenagers he works with, about small victories and ongoing struggles, about the particular satisfaction of being useful to people who need guidance through the confusion of becoming themselves. David graduated last month and will attend community college in the fall, and Marcus speaks about this achievement as if he personally moved mountains to make it possible. This work has changed him in ways that go deeper than the obvious. He carries himself differently now, with the confidence of someone who has found something worth doing with his life. The confusion that drove him to my couch 6 months ago has been replaced by a steadiness I never saw in him during all those college years when we thought we knew exactly who we were and what we wanted. We still do not talk much about what this is, this life we are building together. It exists in the realm of action rather than analysis, in the choice to buy groceries together and share a bed and remember how the other person likes their coffee. When friends ask, we give answers that are truthful but incomplete. We're figuring out, we say. We're taking it slow. We're seeing where this goes. But the truth is more complicated and more simple than any explanation we could offer. The truth is that some Tuesday morning a few weeks ago, I woke to find Marcus watching me sleep, and instead of the panic I might have expected, I felt only the deep peace of being seen completely. He was propped up on one elbow, his hair messy from the pillow, studying my face with the kind of attention usually reserved for beautiful things. "Good morning," I said, and he smiled without looking away. "Good morning," he replied, and in those ordinary words I heard everything we have been too careful to say directly. I heard the promise of more mornings like this one, more evenings of cooking dinner together, more nights of falling asleep to the sound of each other's breathing. He did not say he loved me, and I did not say it back. But in the quiet space between those unspoken words, something real and lasting continued to grow. Something that does not need to announce itself or justify its existence to anyone else. Something that is content to be what it is, undefined and undeniable and absolutely true. Outside my window, spring is beginning again. The trees are putting out new leaves, and the light stays longer each day, and the world continues its ancient work of renewal. Inside, Marcus hums while he cooks our dinner, and Nixie purrs beside my chair, and I turn the page to a new poem about the quiet ways love makes itself known. This is enough. This is everything. This is the life we chose when we stopped pretending we were anything less than essential to each other's happiness.